Okay.
Great. Hi, so I'm Amanda, and I'm very happy to introduce Reverend Allison today. She's a senior organizer with the Washington Interfaith Network. She is an ordained Baptist minister in the Progressive Baptist tradition. She's a graduate of Baylor University and holds a Master of Divinity from Duke, where she focused on racial justice. Allison previously worked in interfaith chaplaincy and with the Church of the Savior in DC before committing to organizing full-time. And she's going to be speaking about WIN and about the work that they do, but just to give a quick sort of primer on the organization. It's a coalition of about 50 congregations around DC and in the metro area. It's a multi-faith, multiracial, and nonpartisan group, which is focused on the issues that matter to its members. And the focus and the priority is fighting for more equitable and just city and region. Among some of their kind of previous campaigns and core focuses are affordable and public housing, making sure that public land is used for the public good, and fighting for environmental justice. And WIN is also has also run campaigns focused on good jobs that pay a fair wage, on immigrant rights,
I'm going to be listening to something while
community safety and gun violence. I know all kind of core issues to us at Holy Trinity. So I will let her talk a little bit more about WIN now. Thanks.
Great. Hi, everybody. It's good to see many of you and many of faces that I recognize from over the years getting to connect with Holy Trinity. So again, thank you, Amanda, for introducing me, and thank you, Ashley, for having me. I'm Reverend Allison Dunn-Almaguer, again, an organizer with WIN. I've been with WIN for about 5.5 years organizing here in the district. And many of you know WIN. I see John. Hello, John. And with Good Faith, you know, about 2 years ago, successfully WIN and Good Faith were able to work together in Ward 3 around the emergency family housing shelters. And many of you were in that team and involved in that work. So we have worked together before and seen each other before and been around one another. So grateful to be able to come back here in a different form, seeing you all in squares. But getting to see you, at least your faces today. So I appreciate getting to spend this time. And I hope everyone has some tea and is ready to kind of hang out and talk through a couple of our campaigns, and also just hear about the way we work and the way that we organize here in the district as WIN. So I have asked Ashley if she would play a short video. So this video we shared at our strategy team meeting in December, kind of an overview of our housing work. So as Amanda shared, housing is just one of the issues that we work on, but wanted to make sure that you saw a little bit and had a little taste in video form of the kind of work that we've done and that we were able to do even during the pandemic, which we are grateful that we could do. So organizer, you'll see on this video, Sidra Siddiqui, one of our organizers who's kind of introducing this work. So she will, I think, Ashley, if you can have that, let me know, thumbs up if you got it. And is the volume working, or? I'm not sure how to. Is it maybe because your headphones are in? And sorry, Ashley, I can't hear you.
All right, sorry guys, let me try again.
And if you need me to do it, I can try, sorry.
Sorry about that. Now I'm locked out of the.
Back when it was just an idea on a napkin. This past year, we are also able to cut the ribbon on short-term family housing in all 8 wards. And this past November, we held the groundbreaking ceremony for Temple Court, which will become 750 units of housing. 252 units of those are going to be affordable, and another 252 are going to be deeply affordable. This is such a big accomplishment accomplishment, and it wouldn't have been possible without the folks at Holy Redeemer and all of the former Temple Courts residents who have been working for the past decade to make sure their voices were heard. Let's watch as we see some of the highlights from the past groundbreaking ceremony.
I want to start by highlighting the tireless work of the Washington Interfaith Network. You've stuck with this project through it all. You've been in the community and at the Wilson Building, making sure that it's a fair deal and the one that works for residents. And now we have the finish line in sight, so I want to thank everyone involved. We look forward to when the construction is done, when we can cut a ribbon and get residents back to their neighborhood.
Hello everyone, my name is Nathan Brown. I lived in a former housing project called Temple Courts for 24 years. And now after a decade of hard work, sacrifice, and consistency, I stand before you on a place I once called home. All of the work we put in alongside Win has led to this moment. Our promise is finally being fulfilled and we are overcome with joy that we are here to bear witness to it. Together, we will celebrate this step forward while continuing to organize with Win until each and every resident can return home. We will continue to organize for anyone who has experienced the pain of displacement.
I'm Angela Wilson Turnbull with the Washington Interfaith Network. I'm a co-chair with our organization, and I'm also with St. Augustine's Catholic Church here in DC. When we bring power of the people together, we can make miracles. Together, we made miracles happen at DC General, turning a dilapidated shelter into housing. Together, we imagined a vacant, underused government building at Spring Road, the old Hebrew home, could become home again. Now 185 units and 149 affordable units are under construction. Now, Mayor Bowser, Win stands ready to organize with you to make miracles happen again and again.
Let's hear it. All the celebration. I want to all the emojis, all the thumbs up.
Thank you, Ashley.
I'm not doing a good job moderating today. Sorry.
Hey, it's way better than me. Technological Zoom calls have been a big challenge and growing point. So again, I am grateful to be here today. And that video just shows a few of the highlights of the housing work that we've been focusing our attention on and the way we work. Just a briefing about Win is that we organize congregations and institutions rather than individuals. We were founded in 1996 and organized in all 8 wards. And our goal is to bring together a diverse coalition of people from different ethnic and racial backgrounds, different classes, and also different religions and people of non-faith as well. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask, can you raise your hand if you know about Win or have heard of Win or this is not new to you? That's good. Thanks. So for the few that haven't, I will just throw up a couple slides just to help guide our discussion today and give a little more background. So bear with me again as I share my screen. Can you all see this? All right, thanks. So really just want to talk about the background of Win, and you can read it here, so I won't read all of it, but this needs to be updated, but we are now about 45 congregations, nonprofits and union across all 8 wards. We are affiliated with something called the IAF, or the Industrial Areas Foundation, which one of the easiest ways to put it is IAF is a denomination, and below that are different localized congregations, maybe, is just one example or one way to help share who we are. But so we each have our own campaigns and flavors and leaders, but we are connected under the same umbrella and organizing principles and are work together in the region. So here in the area, we have Voice in Northern Virginia. We have an affiliate from Prince George's County, all the way from Montgomery County, all the way up to Baltimore and Anne Arundel County as well. We also have affiliates in Europe, Australia. Oh my goodness, I apologize. Europe, Australia, and I am struggling with this here, and in London. So a few of our victories within the district from 1996 here have been a community benefits agreement around the baseball stadium when that came in, really pushing the city to invest money around the dilapidated DC General Shelter, which really came from St. Augustine Catholic and Holy Comforter St. Cyprian Catholic, actually, who really organized on the ground as a part of WIND, listening to homeless families and individuals who were there, and said the one thing that they wanted was to make sure that we could have a smaller, safer place when you fell into homelessness and fell into a time that was the hardest in your life. And so that's why we pushed to ensure that there would be smaller, safer, dignified shelters across or family emergency housing across all 8 wards. We've also, part of other groups, organized to work to get the city to invest in the Housing Production Trust Fund. And then we also build affordable housing as well. So we've spun off a developer that does a lot of work. So we organize tenants, organize around public land, and build our own affordable housing. We also organized for the past 4 years. I spent a lot of time working with WMATA and with the union to organize around jobs and pensions. So about 4.5 years ago, basically the region was planning on cutting pensions and contracting out all WMATA jobs. So instead of making it a public job, privatizing it to different contractors, which they have done in some areas. And when and our regional affiliates worked to organize in the bus yards, we brought out our members of our congregations to go and talk to people who were working and driving buses, to organize them and push to ensure that this was not privatized. When Mayor Bowser said to us, look, I can't stop this by myself. You have to go to Virginia. You have to go to Maryland. We did. So we organized 1,000 people respectively in Virginia and in Maryland to push Governor Northam, and also to push Hogan around ensuring that we did not privatize WMATA, and that we also kept and preserved pensions. And that took a lot of people power in that campaign to ensure that we were able to get that agreement, along with working with the union. So I want to talk about ways to make change. There are many ways to make change, and WIN is one vehicle and one way to do that. So there's direct service, there's charity, there's activism and what we call mobilizing, there's advocacy, and then there's a broad-based organization. So I want you just to take a minute to either write down or write in the chat a meaningful experience that you've had with one of these above ways to make change. And I'm going to stop the share for just a second and ask if anyone has something meaningful that they would like to share. We'll just have time for a few. And I see some in the chat. And I'll read those out for those who don't see them, but I see some share and other food dilution networks, activism, marching with neighbors and young people for Black Lives Matter. Fantastic, all of these. Anyone else? Advocacy on domestic violence awareness, Sunday suppers and Giving Tree. advocacy with Jesuit refugee services on Capitol Hill to support refugees. It's great. And I don't see any hands who want to speak, but I'll jump in and say I see monetary donations when we can. Worked with WIN to advocate for placement on family housing facility in Ward 3 for the first time. Yes. So absolutely, these are each different ways of making change. And one of the reasons I'm really grateful to be here today is of the rich history of Holy Trinity and the Jesuit history of doing great work in the community and throughout the world. And again, there are numerous ways that we see change happen, and we have to do direct service. If we do not do direct service, people do not have shoes or backpacks or basic necessities and needs. We also have to ensure that we are doing advocacy and that we are ensuring that people who do not have a voice are heard. And oftentimes when we think about advocacy, we think about people who cannot speak for themselves. So maybe children is one example. Who legally cannot vote or cannot represent themselves in certain situations. We think of people who are incarcerated and who, when they're in prison, cannot speak on the outside for themselves. So it often requires an advocate. And mobilizing and activism, as someone mentioned, Black Lives Matter, incredibly important movement. And the goal is to change the narrative. And for organizing with WIN, it is a different flavor, I would say, of making change. The goal is to change a specific systemic issue through organizing people power around direct relationships. So I'm going to throw up another slide, and again, just kind of break down a little bit of the drawbacks and strengths of this type of change work. And again, I'll say, we need each one of these types of change. And I personally come from a background of prison and hospital chaplaincy. That's where I started after Duke. Really spent time thinking that that's where I wanted to be, on the ground doing that work. And it was incredibly meaningful and incredibly important to me. But over and over, I began running up against systems that I could not change. For example, when I was working at the hospital, it was a public hospital in Dallas, Texas, where I'm originally from, and was discharging homeless people to the streets because I knew our shelters were full, but I had to discharge them, knowing that they would come back in a day or two later. And recognizing that there were systems that had to change around housing infrastructure, but that I couldn't do that as a direct service person. So I felt called to move my work from direct service into the organizing sphere because I wanted to build power around changing the systems. So this slide here just shows that there are strengths and weaknesses of all of them. So direct service and charity provides an immediate impact. Some people mentioned some incredibly important work that we've worked with them before too. And the weakness is it doesn't always alter the power dynamics. There's usually one group of people giving to another. Activism or mobilizing, one of the strengths of that is it's fast and nimble, and it can cross geographic boundaries and help change public opinion. Again, one of the weaknesses, people are involved sometimes episodically. There's not often deep leadership development. And again, I want to be clear that at times these blur together, right? There sometimes is good leadership development and sometimes not. These are kind of the specific examples that we can tease out later. But it's not always good at delivering in your own neighborhood or place-based work. It's usually national or regional and more of a larger work. Advocacy, it's helpful when, again, people can't speak for themselves, which I shared, but sometimes it doesn't build the depth of relationship. Oftentimes advocates can go in and speak for without knowing the people who are directly affected. But again, it's incredibly helpful when people cannot speak for themselves, and it sometimes can be nimble and fast when people need someone to speak up for them quickly. And broad-based organizing, which is what WIN considers itself, is it builds power over time. And that is a strength, is that our goal is to, if I can, figure out how to see this better, as it builds power over time and works to ensure that people are held accountable, systems and corporations are held accountable over time. But the weakness is it takes time to build. And it takes organizing and relational community power when it takes time to create relationships, to get to know one another, and to listen to people on the ground and to cut campaigns. So it's not always fast and nimble when something is needed. So for example, if there is a building that's on fire, and I would not turn, immediately to say we should create a broad-based organization. We need to mobilize quickly and do something. So again, depending on the type of work that needs to be done, we identify the type of change that we want to do. But I do believe, as a minister and as an organizer, that most often we as people of faith spend our time doing direct service and charity. We spend the majority of our time doing that. And although that is incredibly important, I believe if we shifted our time and shifted our priorities a little bit toward organizing, toward directly connecting with people in all 8 wards here in the district and building relationships to work together for change, we would see more systemic and lasting change. And that is the goal of WIN. And the goal of organizing alongside is that we are building people power to create systemic change. So again, the characteristics of WIN, of a broad-based organization, is we want to build long-term power to keep and make deals. So oftentimes, one example of the Temple Courts you saw in the video, Temple Courts housing, we organized people for 5 years, former residents, to ensure that they could have a seat at the table. And that they could not only get an agreement for right to return and for low-income housing and increased affordable housing on that lot, but it took a long time. It wasn't something we could do very quickly. But our goal is that we are dedicated to diversity. So we want to reflect every city we are in, by race, by faith, and by class and culture. Everywhere we go, our hope is that WIN or AIM in Montgomery County or Voice in Virginia represents the regions that we are in. We are also explicitly nonpartisan. So our goal is that, I like to say, we will hold anyone accountable. I don't care, what your flavor of what you are, if you're Republican, if you're Democrat, if you're undecided or libertarian, we will hold you accountable, because our goal is that we as people of faith want to represent people who are directly affected and organized together to hold you to the standards of public office and hold you accountable to making decisions that really push our city towards a more just and equitable city in housing policy, or in community safety and public safety, or jobs. So any issue that comes up. And again, our members are not individuals, they are institutions, and we are multi-issue. So we are not just another thing that distinguishes a broad-based organization from advocacy or mobilizing. Is advocacy and mobilizing, the reason it's so fast is often it's about one issue. And organizing, it's sometimes slower because our goal is building power for all issues, because we believe that in order to make any change, we have to build power. And we'll talk about that in just a second a little more. And then we are financially self-sufficient, and our goal is to do that so we can be politically independent. So I want to talk a bit about power. The purpose, again, of a broad-based organization is to build this long-term power. So I want you, again, to take a moment to reflect on what power is. When it comes up in your gut, is it something that you have, a negative reaction toward, or something that you are really excited about, or that you feel that you have or don't have? And I want people to take a time and just reflect on this. And I believe in this moment, of race and of organizing around that nationally, that we have already been doing a lot of reflecting on this. So you can also put in the chat again. Great. I see power when associated with common good is exciting. Power like money, neutral, how it is used to make a difference. Yes, Sue, I hear you there. Those in power are very reluctant to share or give it up. Does anyone else want to unmute or share an example maybe? If you feel so moved. And I see Deacon Huber, I think power is neutral, potential to do either good or evil, and either for oneself or others. Power needs to be shared, yes. Power can be negative or positive. We've experienced it in the country. Yes, absolutely. So these are all important topics to bring up, and I wish we could tease these out for a very long time. But power is really complicated, as each of you know, and you've put. It's not something that is easy to talk about, especially when we're talking about our own gut reactions. I will share that I often associated power as something that was bad. Because as a young woman growing up in the South and in a Southern Baptist tradition where women did not have the ability to speak or preach, I often saw power as ways to exclude me from leadership or keep me in my place, for example. So for a long time, power was not something that I wanted or thought was a good thing, because I saw power as something that was dominant and could be used in an abusive way. And especially, I think someone put that we're seeing this a lot in our country. We have seen a lot of dominant power. For example, when we see children who are put in camps without and separated from their parents, that's a dominant power example. And I'm going to again share my screen and go back. So Wynne defines power as the ability to act. So I know that you all heard from Schroeder recently, who is a wonderful leader in our community. Our offices, when we had offices, were actually right next door to In Street Village. Wynne helped organize for the funding for In Street Village a long time ago, and we have a really strong partnership with them. And when we think about ways to actually do something about the issues in our cities, no matter what it is, no matter if it's violence in our community, no matter if it's racial inequity, if it is jobs, if it is displacement or housing issues, we believe in organizing, and we fundamentally believe in Wynne, that in order to do anything, you need power. And power simply means the ability to act. So I would argue that power is a good, that it gives you the ability to do something, to act. And it's made up of two elements, of organized people and organized money. So when we work to organize both, we work to organize people in our institutions and on the ground and in public housing units and in neighborhoods. We also organize money. We organize money again to be financially independent and work to be sustainable, so that we can do projects like Fort DuPont, which we did in Ward 7, when we were able to build and organize $4 million from our regional and local affiliates and denominations, including Catholics, to be able to say, if the city can't do it, we will use our own money to build affordable housing. And we were able to, in that situation, work out an agreement with the city where we got public land for $1 and leveraged the funding we had gotten from our organizations to build low-income home ownership opportunities in housing there. So again, power is the ability to act. So I believe that we as people of faith get to challenge ourselves to think about power as a good thing, that God gives us and wants us to have power and the ability to act in our neighborhoods and in our communities and on the self-interests of our communities. You know, one thing I often share is when I first started organizing, I started asking, the question around power is who wants it, and do you want it, and how do you feel about it? The same question I'm asking you. And every time I went to a congregation, I heard people say, yeah, power can be good, it can be bad, it's okay, or I kind of want power, but I don't want too much of it because power corrupts. And that's not always true, but I heard that refrain a lot. And then I went to places like public housing and then organized east of the river, and predominantly people of color would say the exact opposite to me, especially in public housing. They, one woman said to me, who I will never forget, Miss Johnson said, "Allison, of course I want power. I want power because I know that I have tried to remediate the mold and get the rats out of my housing for 10 years, and I haven't been able to do anything about it. Yes, I want power." So our goal in organizing is to help people wrestle with why power is something that we struggle with internally and in our country, and reteach that power is a good thing when used accountable and well and relationally. And then second, how to get that power so that we can make change locally. So we also teach that power comes in two forms, one in a dominant form and two in a relational form. And so I'm not being dismissive when people in our congregations, including myself, say, we struggle with power can be good or bad, or have ambivalence around power. Not at all, because we see dominant power in numerous expressions that have been very destructive in our own lives and nationally. And we don't want anything to do with that. And amen, as people of faith, we should not want to have dominant power over people. So dominant power, again, is what we associate with it. It's this bad or corrupt, abusive power, and it's built through control or violence or the threat of violence. So Wynne wants to build the second form of power, which we call relational power. It's power that is built through consent, through mutual self-interest, and is accountable, again, in relationship to one another. And that is the type of power we want to build. So before I get to that next slide, I want to just take a brief moment to have a bit of conversation about that. And I want to ask if I can have some reactions, not just in the chat, if people feel comfortable talking about that. And before we do that, I want to share about Miss Johnson and go back to the public housing story. So when working with her and she shared, I really want to remediate mold and get rid of these rats. And I have tried for years. And for years, she had people come in and teach about the environmental impacts of rats and how roaches can cause asthma. There had been people who had come in and done research and shared and written articles, but there had not been a change. So what I proposed is that we began to organize and put direct pressure on the person who could change that. And in this moment, and this example, if I can share, happened during a pandemic. And I said with Miss Johnson, how many, neighbors and people care about this? And she said, everyone in my building. So she began to bring residents to a Zoom meeting, and we brought congregation members. And this was Langston Terrace. So if you're familiar with Ward 5 in that area, we organized our churches and got some of our neighborhood churches who were surrounding there to jump on a Zoom call as well, began to build relationships and listen to some of the issues that were pressing there. And as soon as we felt that we could trust one another a little bit, as much as we can through these squares, we went to DCHA, because DCHA, DC Housing Authority, is the person directly responsible for our public housing in the district. So we identified who was the person who could make the change, and then asked, how can we build enough power to put pressure on them, relational power, to work together to say, look, this needs to change. And we did. And DCHA, first just said, oh, okay, we'll do something about it. Give us a little while, but we're really struggling in the pandemic, just like everyone else, and kind of tried to slow roll things. So we went back and we got numerous, about 500 letters from our congregation members to say that we support and we see what's going on here at Langston and we want to see change. And in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of November, about 15 people were moved into places with their consent, into hotels and other areas, and they fixed up the mold and did mold remediation for those that were worse. They came in and brought an exterminator for rats and roaches, and were able to make change in those units, and people have now come back to remediated units. And again, Ms. Johnson shared, without this kind of work and without Win, I wouldn't know that my voice mattered. She's like, I've been trying to make these changes for years, but now I get that when we organize people across race and class, the city listens to you, right? When we have people of faith from all different backgrounds coming together in a directed relational way, saying, this is the change we want to make. And the price of a critique is having a plan, right? We don't just critique and throw stones, but we say, this is what we want to see. And what we're working on with that team now, and what we have started working on, is redevelopment. And that is what the majority of the tenants really want, is not just this remediation, but in the long term, redevelopment and potential home ownership options. And that is, a larger build first strategy campaign that Win has been working on since before the pandemic, organizing teams of people within public housing around how we can find ways to do that together. So I wanted to share that story because that's an example of the way that Win likes to use power and the way we want to train people to use power well, relationally, so that we can target our power and use it to create change. So if we can just have a few minutes for just reactions or responses to that.
I'll jump in first then. I was gonna hopefully let someone jump in. Sorry that I'm late. I was coming from Mass at work.
I think that's a good excuse.
Yeah. In Catholic social teaching, the two buzzwords that always are on my heart are solidarity and subsidiarity. And really, power is best exerted at the lowest possible level, subsidiarity. That is where it's most effective, but it's also most just. It is where the person who is able to advocate for themselves and is so empowered to do so. And it's always best to use the concrete examples as you did. I mean, that to me, that's when I hear that, I think that's what I need to hear. That's what all of us as Americans, as humans, as fellow travelers need to hear, is those examples of someone who was empowered and, to act for themselves, for others, to correct wrongs, and to make a better world.
And that's a helpful way to look at it.
I just wanted to make a comment. The one thing I found really powerful is, you talked about how when people of faith come together, you create powerful change. And also, I think it also helps, especially in this time of like racial equity, working together and not coming into a situation, you can see from our screen, like in a white savior mode of how it helps us find a way to do that without projecting that, I guess it's energy. That's not what our intent is, but the energy probably does feel more like that.
Absolutely. Thanks. And I think that's a really important piece that you brought up, Ms. Roy. And, the next kind of piece I wanted to share, and then I want to go back, is that Win does all of our work through a racial equity lens. The reason we focus on these campaigns around jobs or housing is to ensure that people of color, their voices are heard and that they're at the center, and that we are directly organizing people who are directly affected. And again, we want to allow people who are white, who are allies, who have power, to learn to use their power well. I will want to say, another woman in public housing taught me the largest lesson I would ever learn about 6 years ago. And Miss Bennett said, "Allison, I am so sick and tired of weak white allies." She said, "They come in here and they say, oh, I want to give up my power. I have power. I want to give it up so you can have it." And she said, "When you give up your power, it doesn't come to me. I'm still here." She said, "What I want is for white allies to learn to use their power in ways that help to liberate themselves and me together. And we can only do that through relationship." And that lesson is the reason that I stay in organizing. And it's the reason that I'm here today, to help recognize that we, of people from all races and classes and backgrounds, have gifts of power and relational connections that we can use in different ways for common liberation. And that can only be done, again, in relationship, which is what WIN prioritizes, is that we have to know one another to work together and to be accountable to one another. Because if it is just us going to council and saying, this is what public housing residents want, well, we're probably going to get that wrong because we don't live in public housing. But if we go together, to say, Miss Bennett, Miss Johnson, what do you want to see? What do you want done? Let's go together and say, this is what we want to see collectively together. So absolutely. And in this moment, again, racial equity is at the center and has been at the center of our work. And our goal as organizers is to see, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, there is a moral arc, and that moral arc does bend towards justice. And I believe as organizers, we are called, and as people of faith, we are called to not just pray for that arc to bend, not just dream about that bent arc, but to push it actively, collectively together to make that arc bend toward justice. That is our job. And if I can dare to say and preach a little bit, as people of faith, if we are not using our power individually and collectively to push that arc towards justice, locally, regionally, nationally, and in our world, then that's a sin.
Mm-hmm. This is Margie, and I have a question and kind of a comment. My question is related to what we're discussing right here, because I'm very process oriented. So when you first spoke with the women in the housing that was substandard, and you mentioned bringing in congregations, were they the local congregations? Were it like their congregations? I'm also concerned with the idea of, I believe in the relationship and the trust that builds is critical. I'm wondering about that process of engaging the congregations, which congregations, and then are these long-term relationships, or do the external congregations disappear after this? And then sort of related to that, is there an effort, has there been an effort to deal with this from a public policy or legislative perspective with those inequities and those problems in the housing?
Thank you, Margie. Those are great questions. And because of our limited time, I had to truncate that story.
Sure.
So even though that campaign was done during the pandemic, we've started building those relationships years ago. And so really what we had is some leaders from Holy Comforter St. Cyprian, and some leaders from Metropolitan AME and Lutheran Church of the Reformation. They had a team that met Miss Hardesty, another woman, who is the president of the association. And we began having one-on-one conversations and began talking, and she is the one who invited us in. And so we never go into places that we have not been invited. So the reason also that we organize with institutions is our institutions are our engagement into neighborhoods. So I'm going to share another example just because I think this is, again, examples and stories are the way that people begin to understand how we work. So with Temple Courts is on North Capitol and K, right across from the NPR building that was, I guess it's not new anymore. I was going to say new, but they're in Gonzaga. It was formerly housing that was affordable housing and subsidized by the city, but not public housing, was knocked down about 12 years ago and never rebuilt. So on a cold winter afternoon, a team from Holy Redeemer, Mount Lebanon Baptist, and Mount Airy Baptist, who are anchor institutions in that neighborhood, we did a door knocking session, and we knocked on hundreds of doors just trying to get to know neighbors. And we do this periodically. We had done this, they have actually been founding members of WIN for 20 years. So we've done this off and on at different times and have been different local campaigns. So when we started doing that organizing and door knocking, we asked the simple question of our neighbors: what is the biggest thing in this neighborhood you care about and want to change? And the number one thing we heard from former residents and neighbor who used to live there but had been redistricted or moved, not redistricted, moved to other buildings like 2M and Severna, and some who were just hanging out on the streets, and said, look, our number one issue is we were told that we would get to come home, that it was going to be knocked down so it would be better. And we still have been displaced. And this was, after they'd been gone for about 8 years. So we challenged, you saw the young man, Nathan Brown, who spoke, him and some other former residents to bring together some former residents if they were interested. And again, that relational power is all about consent. So the question was, do you want to do this? Are you interested in getting to know us and us getting to know you? And when Nathan came to meetings, he brought about 15 residents, and we brought some teams from Holy Redeemer, Mount Lebanon, and Mount Airy, some who lived in the neighborhood, but the majority who were just members through their institution, some who lived in Virginia or Maryland, but represented an institution that had been in that neighborhood for generations. We came and we met in the basement of Holy Redeemer and identified, what are some things we want to work on together? How can we target to build this back? So we began building teams in the local elementary school and at our churches and talking about this and doing research, meeting with policy groups, and recognizing that there were legal rights that it should be rebuilt, but it had never happened legally because we recognize that even law is not always power. Is that people break the law all the time, people in power especially. So we worked to build after about 6 months, had 350 people with Councilmember Allen, and said, this is a priority. We want you to work with us in Ward 6 to bring our neighbors back home. And then we realized we need more power. And it was the mayor and the executive branch who would be able to do this. And again, this is still a truncated story. This is a years-long campaign in the making. So that next year, we actually brought this back to the larger WIN team of 40 institutions at that time and held a 1,000-person action with the mayor, if you can remember when we met in person. And this was one of the priorities that came to the top. And the mayor agreed at that time to commit funding and bring people back. And it has been, a back and forth working with DMPED, the executive branch, et cetera. DMPED is the deputy mayor for planning and economic development, who is in charge of all of our development projects, to work with them. And every time we met with DMPED or the mayor, tenants were in that room along with our leaders of faith, because we don't want our people of faith to go and represent tenants. We want them to come together so that we're all growing in relationship and in our ability to work and negotiate with power. So that is an example. And to answer your question about do we leave? We absolutely don't leave. And that's why we work with our institutions and congregations, because people leave, but institutions never leave. And the most interesting, not interesting, but the most powerful story I would say that we found is when Nathan came, that young man from Temple Courts, to speak in front of the 350 people and Councilmember Allen. His mom came and he introduced me to his mom after. And she said, Allison, you don't know this, but when Temple Courts was first being knocked down, I worked with WIN and Holy Redeemer to fight to stop it. But we didn't have the power at the time to do that. And she said, when Nathan was a kid, I'd drag him to win meetings, and he didn't even know they were win meetings. And to me, that's a power of institution, especially of Holy Redeemer that has been in the neighborhood for so long, and of win is that, we've been around, and though campaigns and people and leaders may change, it is over time connected. I hope is that helpful?
Hey, Allison, we're almost approaching the hour, and we can all stay, but some people will start to leave. Can you maybe just highlight what you see some of the priorities for the coming year, as we are still in the midst of the pandemic and with the new administration, just kind of what you see when focused on?
Absolutely. Thank you. So I will say, housing is still a huge priority. It is, and it always, has been and will be, as we're in a heavily gentrified city. So we have been working on a public parcel called Reservation 13. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It's where DC General used to be, where DC Jail is, right on the edge of Capitol Hill. It's now technically in Ward 7, was formerly in Ward 6, but it is 67 acres of public land that is going to be redeveloped. And Wynn saw this as an opportunity years, when this first started coming in DC General, after we organized alongside of other groups and residents to make sure that it was closed. We really pressed to say, we want to ensure that this does not just go to condos, but that it is real mixed income housing. So we pressed and have organized around this for about 3 years since it, being shut down, or working for that. And in making sure that in the RFP, there was an equity requirement, and a requirement for a third. So a third market rate housing, a third workforce housing for teachers, nurses, firefighters, and a third low income. This is the example we took from Temple Courts. That's what we fought for there, the story we were just talking about. And it has, successfully, the finances were able to work out. So we wanted to push for that again. So that is now in the RFP, and that took, we were able to get that in the RFP with 1,000 people over Zoom in a pandemic. And that came during budget season. And there are other requirements there, but we're really now working with developers and working with the city to ensure that we see mixed income housing, that we see local jobs coming from that. So Reservation 13 is a huge piece where we're going to need a lot of people power, because we know, again, as the RFP may say something, but it doesn't mean, again, RFP is a request for proposals. If we do not organize and ensure that developers are actually following that, a law can mean nothing. So we're organizing and pressing around that. And we also have a local campaign with Pepco. So Pepco, starting in the budget season again, we found was asking for huge wage or huge increases from people like us. And because it is a private and semi-public institution, they're the only ones we've got, right? If you live in DC, you cannot get energy from anyone else. And so if they're forcing wage rates, us to increase what we pay to them, we want to say, what are you doing for our community in return? So our strategy team and our leaders began doing research on Pepco, began recognizing that they did not have track contractors. They did not track how much their contractors paid people and workers. And many of their, after doing deep research, many of their workers who were contracted out did not even receive minimum wage. They did not contract with many Black-owned businesses, even though there are agreements in the law that the city says they should. So we began for the past 6 months to develop a relationship with Pepco, put pressure on them through press conferences, et cetera, to be able to get their attention and get meetings with them. So we have now come to an agreement that they are going to self-legislate themselves, and that will be in the press actually today. Nobody knows about it, that we're going in together to make a legislation that they will self-legislate Pepco workers and their contractors to require contractors to make minimum wage, and above that, union wage is what we pressed for. And also will create a Black business fund and a pipeline for training people who are local residents. Again, there's an agreement in the city and they did not follow it. They had an agreement, they had about 5% local hire rate, which was just disgusting. So working to make sure there's a pipeline of local hire and from our communities. So we're asking our churches in Ward 7 and 8 and 5 who are high unemployment areas to find those people. And again, that's one of our big campaigns around corporate accountability. And then, there is a third campaign. We have a lot, but a third major one is really around environmentalism and housing and figuring out how we can green buildings. So Sidra Siddiqui, the organizer you saw in that video, is leading that team. We have a team also around immigrant rights, where we worked to organize a coalition about 5 years ago with CARE Coalition and with Carecen and other immigrant service providers to basically organize them and say, what do you need in the budget? And 2.5 million was the number we came up with, organized and pressed for that. And have just been really defending it in these past years during budget cuts. It was going to be the first thing that was slashed, and we organized during budget season last year to say absolutely not. And lastly, we have a public safety team, mainly again with our congregations in Ward 7 and 8, who are really working to press and push around putting funding from police into mental health providers in schools and in other service areas rather than just policing. And lastly, we do have a focus on the budget that's coming up. So many of you, I'm sure, have been involved in the budget process within the district, and it affects all of these campaigns. But we have a team who is researching this year's budget, or FY22, and will work to really allocate to show how the budget is a moral document and how we can push it to, again, bend that moral arc. So we had a press conference lastly in Ward 7 in the budget last year, where our leaders who are, people of color and pastors east of the river said, look, if Black Lives Matter, let's show it in the budget. And that's what we're practically trying to do again, this year. If we're really going to organize around racial justice, our budget has to reflect that. And that's not just going to happen because of the goodwill of people, right? Sometimes maybe, but it happens if we come together as people of faith and as taxpayers and as people who care to push our budget to reflect that.
I have one more question before I don't know how much time you have to share with us, so let me know if you need to wrap it up. If parishioners decided that having Holy Trinity join Washington Interfaith Network, and it would be a parishioner decision, not my decision, how would you galvanize a community of 67 zip codes from Georgetown? I mean, what role do you see our voices and our effort and our faith in what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I froze for a second there. Really, the way we do membership is through congregations, and there has to be, consent from the top down to a group of leaders who want to own it. And the reason we want a group of leaders to own it is because we recognize that organizing can be a lot of work. So when you have a team, you have different groups of, one person who's able to go to one meeting and one person who can go to another one, and you don't have one person who's at 5 meetings a week. So we want a team, and we also want a team to reflect, the broad base of the institution and the congregation itself. Because I guarantee, just from the things I've seen in the chat already, that many of you on this call have interests around different issues that you'd want to build power around. But ultimately, we'd want to build power collectively so we can take on these issues as they, weave together. But the role I see is bringing more people power. Is when I think about Reservation 13, we are going up against developers and corporate interests. And especially when we're looking at PEPCO, to hold them accountable, we're going to need even more people power to say these are the things that we want. And the more people power we have, the more more ability we have to make change. And Holy Trinity, again, is a congregation that has leaders who are connected, who share deep values, who have not only organized people, but organized money as well. And all of those things contribute to power and can work together to help rearrange the way that we see our city. One of the goals that some of our pastors have been floating by is, Allison, can we do this raising money for a low income home ownership again? And that is a big push that we're probably going to try to do again, is who are the individuals who want to reallocate wealth to be able to say to people of color in the city, you've been shut out of the economy. How can we build equity through home ownership? So I see it in numerous ways. People, through money, through issues, through expertise. There's also people on this call and, who have deep relationships and deep experience in refugee work, in immigration, in housing. And, I'm looking at a square next to me in journalism. We've got people like you who we want to learn from and can help build our teams and help grow our teams in the experiences that you've had when we're taking on specific issues around public housing, for example. So that it's building teams and energy to come in and be power, be on the ground, be relational. The more people we have like you who are willing to go out and meet people who are different than them, again, the more power we have in the communities around. And I'm curious if there's one thing Holy Trinity wants to do in their neighborhood too. You're right across from Miriam's Kitchen, who's also a member of WIN, and how can we, find ways to connect also with our other partners and take on something big. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, does anyone have a quick question? Allison, tell me if you need, I don't know what your hard stop is.
I was going to say baby and toddler are asleep, so I'm okay.
Okay, great. Does anyone have a question? Want to raise your hand and unmute and ask? Margie?
Hang on. Okay. When you do the door knocking and work with communities, is there ever an approach of more of a positive or appreciative inquiry, where instead of looking for the areas that are the negatives, that there's a sense of, what do you love about your community? What would you like to see more of? And building on from that perspective?
Yes. And Margie, come join our team. Absolutely. I think you're right. That is another thing that we do ask at times is what do you want to see more of? And especially, in Ward 7, we did that right before pandemic shutdown, and people said they wanted to see more green space. And they wanted to see, they needed more lights in certain areas, that they had some on Massachusetts Avenue, but not, or Minnesota Avenue, but not enough. So yes, it's different in every local campaign.
Yeah.
And what I'd want to see, this congregation of Holy Trinity do is kind of claim a local campaign that you'd want to work in, one or two places that you could really engage with people and get to know people and try out some of these practices. Or maybe the budget is a way to get to know us better. Is working on budget issues with us and hearing, again, the budget issues come from, we do listening sessions in all 8 wards to hear what are people's priorities for the budget, and making sure that those are reflected.
When you talked about the budget and immigration, were you talking about the defense fund and or the payments to people who are in the hospitality industries and others who are mostly immigrants, that sort of little segment of the budget there? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So we worked with a lot of different service providers and legal service providers to organize around that funding pot.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks. And then I see a question, how do you maintain a focus on community project because campaigns can fall apart as different people voice different aspects of interest? Absolutely. And that is the challenge of our organizers, is to really help ensure that we've got leaders who are staying in for the long haul, and institutions. So, for Temple Courts, we have had different leaders from Holy Redeemer, Mount Airy, and Mount Lebanon lead in different ways and kind of cycle in and out. But the institution has still led it, if that makes sense. But there are different individuals connected to the core team that help lead throughout the different years. And as an organizer, you know, my job is to help say, if this is where, you know, the energy is, then we've got to keep pursuing it. You know, but if, for example, in, you know, in good leadership, if there's no energy around something, you cannot force people to organize around something they don't want to do. And there have been times that people have done a lot of research on a campaign and started getting together and then kind of started deciding this wasn't an interest. And we also have to honor that, you know, there are numerous issues that we could take on. But the biggest goal is that we don't organize around issues, that we organize around power, so that when something is coming up, that we're able to take it on. But I think that is I'm sorry, I was distracted by one of the chats, but I think that's really, again, the goal of the campaigns are up to the people.
Anyone else have a question? All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining on our second community of the year. It was actually worked out great to have Schroeder's voice on Tuesday night and then to follow up with Allison today. As I mentioned at the beginning, Amanda Erickson is kind of our advocate right now for WEN, but as Allison also pointed out, it's not a one-person effort. And so if anything today has compelled you to want to learn more about having Holy Trinity have a relationship at WEN, I encourage you to reach out to me so that we can all work together with Amanda and see if there is a path forward. But Allison, thank you very much. We're glad to hear your voice too. And we do subscribe, and we did promote some of the voting efforts at the beginning of the pandemic. I can't believe it's almost been a year from all of that. But you know, thank you, and thank you for all that you do. And I think that I have a strong suspicion we'll be working with you, but well, I'll wait to hear from all my social justice warriors here what the path forward might be. So.
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful for you guys having me. I just put my name and my email in the chat, and you can also feel free to reach out to me as well. But thanks for having me today.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Peace.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you. It was a great presentation.
Thank
Wonderful.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.